Once again, just want to remind you that you always need to write these files out. If the icon's yellow, it will get lost. Okay, so I write that out, and it also puts it into our sketchbook. So now we can get easier access to this serial debug code. So let's have the potentiometer move the LED in the Neopixel array that we were using earlier. So let's start by unplugging the board and attaching the Neopixel array back in again. So I'll just do that right now. Kind of tight in here, but we're going to get a second ground pin. And then if you'll notice, there's not another 5-volt output. So let's take a look at the schematic and see where we can get 5 volts. So if we go back out to Products, Arduino, and select UNO, and go back down to the schematic we were looking at earlier. So we can see here that this is the power connector that is right here on the board, and 5 volts is attached to pin 5, which actually says power on there. 5 volts, I mean. It's also attached 3 pins up. So let's take a look at that. So if the power is where the orange is, 3 pins up would be this IO ref pin. Not the reset, but the IO ref. So let's plug that in there. So notice there's 2 empty holes between the power to the potentiometer and to the Neopixel. So let's look at the schematic again and see we're doing that right. Yeah, so we have 5 volts on this pin, and then 3 pins above that, two spaces in between, and then that. So those are both 5 volts. So I think we're good with that. And then we'll connect the signal line back over to 6 like we had before. So that's IO6. You can see that right there. And we'll go back to our code. Now the big decision. Do we take this serial code and analog read and put it into our Neopixel code we wrote earlier, or do we take the Neopixel code and add it into here? How about this? We'll leave this code as is, and then we'll just make a copy. So we'll duplicate the sketch, copy, and we will rename this one to analog input Neopixel. So that's the one we're working on this copy here now. So let's go back into the Neopixel code that we wrote earlier and get what we need from that. So copy the stuff above the first function, the void function, and put it in here. And let's go back to the Neopixel code. And we also need this pixels begin in our setup. So we'll put that right here. And we can get rid of this LED pin since we're not going to be driving that anymore. As well as getting rid of this LED pin since we don't need that. And then let's go down here and get rid of a few of these lines, which we don't need. And let's go back to the Neopixel code and grab the section that we used to write it out. So we'll do that right here. And we'll put that code right here. And we're not going to use a for next loop here this time. So we can bring the indent back out in line with all the other code here. So if you remember, this I in this line here represents which pixel we're driving of the Neopixel array. And so its value should be somewhere from 0 up through 7. But this analog read function puts out a value which is 0 through 1023. So let's create a new variable, call it position. And that'll be equal to this sensor value divided by 128. So if the value is 0 divided by 128, we still get 0. If it's 1023 and we divide by 128, well, we should get 7. And then, you can imagine it would scale in between. So now we're going to replace that variable I with this position variable. And then, of course, we have to define that up here. So we'll do that right now. Integer position equals 0. Initialize it. And let's also pick one of these colors to be active. So we'll pick red. And let's see if that compiles. Okay. So it looks like we forgot to include the Adafruit Neopixel library. So let's go back, take a look at that. This is include statement we want to grab. And we'll drop it in right here. And let's try that. So we want to get num pixels to be defined here. So go back to our code, put that in here. And we also got to get the pin, which we know that's 6, so we'll just do that. And we'll compile that. And note, I've also plugged the board back in. That's why it shows up as genuine UNO. And does it work? Let's see. No, it doesn't. All right, let's figure out what's going on here. Well, for one, we don't want this delay value with the sensor value because we're using that to get the position. And we've also already got this delay here, which is defined up here. And let's take a look at what the sensor value and position are. So we can do that by copying that. And what we'll do is we're going to put a space between the sensor value and position. So we're going to copy position and put it down here. And we don't want these each to be on their own line. It's going to print this value and then a space and then that. So let's see how that works. And we'll turn on the serial port over here. Well, we can see that our position is behaving correctly. We get a value which is somewhere from 0 up to 7. So that's good. And if we zoom in, we can see that the LED is actually moving to follow along with the potentiometer. So I think we got it to work, and the debugging helped us.